The Americans named it a rolling coffin. Britain called it the death trap on tracks. Russia said it was a tomb for 7 men. Germany scoffed and labeled it target practice. In 1941, the M3 medium tank became history's most ridiculed fighting machine. Standing 10 feet tall with a cannon jutting from its side like an ancient warship, it appeared designed for the wrong century. Every nation that fielded one invented fresh insults. Yet by May 1942, this laughingstock accomplished what no British armor could manage. It shattered Rommel's advance. June 1940. German panzers obliterated France within 6 weeks. The armored divisions that destroyed French defenses weren't numerically dominant. France possessed superior tank numbers, but German training surpassed theirs. German doctrine proved revolutionary, and German leadership grasped how to mass armor at critical junctions. American war planners studied the footage and comprehended the implications. Modern combat had transformed. Tanks had evolved beyond infantry support weapons. Armor now represented the decisive force. The United States Army operated approximately 400 tanks. Most were M2 light models mounting machine guns. Some newer variants carried compact 37mm cannons. Should America join the conflict, its soldiers would confront history's most battle-hardened armored forces, with machinery suited for outdated warfare. The Army recognized precisely what circumstances demanded: a medium tank mounting a 75mm cannon, not merely for caliber, but for ammunition versatility. This weapon could launch armor-penetrating shells against enemy tanks, obviously crucial, but it could also fire explosive shells against fortifications, gun positions, and infantry. Smaller weapons couldn't manage both. The British 2-pounder measured 40 millimeters. It lacked effective explosive ammunition. When British tanks faced infantry or hardened positions, they possessed only machine guns. The 75mm offered dual capability. A single tank could eliminate enemy armor and assist infantry. That versatility would become critical. However, American manufacturing couldn't produce a proper 75mm tank, not immediately. Tank turrets demand precision manufacturing. The gun sits within a rotating assembly mounted on the chassis. When firing, recoil energy transfers backward through the turret mechanism into the hull frame. Larger guns generate greater recoil. Greater recoil necessitates larger turret assemblies. A 75mm weapon required a turret ring exceeding 60 inches diameter to absorb the forces generated. American foundries in 1940 couldn't cast components that massive. The precision tooling didn't exist. Constructing new foundries and training personnel would consume 18 months minimum. The M4 Sherman was already under design. Proper turret, proper weapon, proper fighting vehicle. But Shermans wouldn't reach battlefields in quantity until late 1942. The Army required armor in 1941, something capable of engaging panzers immediately, not in 2 years. Engineers at Rock Island Arsenal suggested a solution that troubled everyone. What if they installed the 75mm cannon in the hull rather than a turret? It represented obsolete thinking. World War I tanks had employed side-mounted guns. Naval craft still utilized them, but contemporary tank philosophy demanded rotating turrets for tactical flexibility. A home-mounted gun could only fire within a restricted arc. To engage flanking targets, the entire vehicle had to pivot. In fluid combat, that hesitation could prove lethal. The engineers understood every objection. They recommended the design regardless, because a 75mm gun in the hull infinitely exceeded possessing nothing whatsoever. The Army authorized development in July 1940. The initial prototype appeared by January 1941. Manufacturing commenced in August. The M3 medium tank measured 10 feet tall. For reference, the Sherman would measure 9 feet. A contemporary M1 Abrams measures 8. The M3 towered over contemporaries. The height resulted from stacking systems. An aircraft power plant occupied the rear, the Wright Continental R975, a radio motor originally engineered for airplanes. Powerful and dependable, but tall. The 75mm sponson occupied the front right hull. Above it, a compact turret held a 37mm gun for lighter threats. A commander's cupola crowned that. 3 tiers, 10 feet, the vertical nightmare. 7 crew members crammed inside. The armor was riveted steel, 51mm thick frontally. To crews inside, those rivets essentially represented bullets awaiting release. A non-penetrating exterior impact could shear a rivet head internally, converting it into shrapnel ricocheting through a crowded steel chamber. Combined with the catastrophic height, these defects meant American tankers didn't simply ridicule the M3, they dreaded it. Nobody desired combat in this contraption. Yet between August 1941 and December 1942, American factories would manufacture 6,258 units. In North Africa, the British 8th Army had been retreating for 18 months. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel arrived February 1941 with a modest German contingent supporting the Italians. Within weeks, he'd driven the British toward the Egyptian frontier. Within months, he'd become the desert's most feared commander. The British initiated Operation Crusader in November 1941. Over 700 tanks assaulted Rommel's defenses. The outcome was tactical chaos. British armor charged German anti-tank positions. German panzers eliminated British tanks at distance. The British reclaimed territory, but casualties were catastrophic. They surrendered over 500 tanks, but Rommel lost over 300, more than half his entire armored strength. The issue was firepower. British Crusader and Stuart tanks carried 2-pounder guns, 40mm weapons with one fatal limitation. They could only fire armor-piercing ammunition. The 2-pounder was inadequate. At combat distances, it struggled penetrating German Panzer III frontal plates. The newer Panzer III Specials and Panzer IVs were nearly invulnerable. British tank crews would strike German tanks and observe their shells deflect. Then German 50mm guns would pierce British armor effortlessly. The engagement mathematics was savage. Germans could destroy British tanks at 800 meters. British could barely damage Germans at 400 meters. Worse, without effective explosive rounds, they were defenseless against exposed targets. German 88mm crews learned they could operate openly. For the crews, it was perpetual torment. They had to approach suicidal distances just to scratch a panzer, while understanding the Germans could penetrate their armor before the British could sight. It wasn't merely tactical, it was a confidence crisis. They recognized their equipment was inadequate. By early 1942, the British desperately needed salvation. In January 1942, the first M3 Grants reached Egypt. The British had modified the configuration slightly. Their variant had a reduced turret with internal radio. They named it after Ulysses Grant. The standard American variant retained the taller turret. The British designated it the Lee after Grant's adversary. British tank crews assembled around the towering machines and stared. The height was preposterous. On the level desert, this vehicle would be visible for miles. But then they examined the weapon. 75mm, nearly double the caliber of their 2-pounders. It could fire armor-penetrating shells against tanks and explosive shells against everything else. They had been perishing with inadequate guns for 18 months. Then they test-fired the 75mm. The 75mm projectile traveled farther and impacted harder than anything British tankers had ever employed. At 1,000 meters, the shell penetrated armor plate representing a Panzer III. At 1,500 meters, it still achieved lethal penetration. The explosive rounds proved even more devastating. They could annihilate gun emplacements, fortifications, and infantry concentrations from ranges where enemy weapons couldn't reach the tank. After 18 months of helplessness, they suddenly possessed weaponry that could eliminate anything on the battlefield. The Grant was ugly, the Grant was tall, the Grant was tactically awkward, but the Grant could destroy panzers from 1,000 meters distance. British commanders allocated 16 7 Grants to the 4th Armored Brigade. They positioned them for Rommel's anticipated offensive, and then they waited. By May 1942, both armies had established positions along the Gazala line in Libya. Rommel commanded 560 tanks. The British fielded 850, including 167 of the new Grants with the 4th Armored Brigade. German intelligence noted the arrival of tall, ungainly American vehicles with hull-mounted cannons. Rommel's staff dismissed the danger. The height rendered these tanks conspicuous targets. The Sponson gun was a World War I relic. German crews would eliminate them easily. On May 26, 1942, Rommel launched Operation Venezia. Afrika Korps swept south around the Gazala line exactly as anticipated. German tank commanders expected another triumph, another British withdrawal, another demonstration of German dominance. The following morning, they encountered the 4th Armored Brigade. May 27, 1942. The desert south of Gazala. Panzers from the 15th Panzer Division spotted British armor and advanced to engage. Standard doctrine, close to 500 meters, where German guns could reliably penetrate British armor. The distance was 1,200 meters when the British opened fire. German commanders didn't comprehend what was occurring. Shells were striking from ranges where British guns had always been ineffective. The shells weren't deflecting. The 1st Panzer erupted. Flames and smoke burst from the turret. Then a second, then a third. German crews accelerated forward, attempting to close the gap. Their 50mm guns couldn't penetrate the strange new tanks at this range. They needed closer proximity. The British continued firing. The mathematics was simple and brutal. The M3 Grant's 75mm gun could penetrate Panzer III frontal armor from 1,000 meters. The short-barreled 50mm guns on most German tanks couldn't penetrate Grant armor until point-blank range. That meant the Grants possessed a killing zone measured in hundreds of meters, a stretch of desert where they could eliminate panzers that couldn't retaliate. German commanders attempted rushing through the killing zone. They accelerated toward the British line, hoping velocity would preserve them. It didn't. British gunners had time for multiple shots before German tanks closed to effective range. Each successful hit meant another panzer burning. The discipline of the Afrika Korps began fracturing. Radio communications, typically precise and professional, dissolved into chaos. Veteran crews who had mocked the target practice were now screaming about invisible batteries destroying them from the horizon. They couldn't comprehend what was killing them. Reports flooded German headquarters throughout the morning. British tanks were engaging from beyond 1,000 meters. German shells weren't penetrating at range. Multiple panzers lost in each engagement. The assault on the British center had completely stalled. Units that should have broken through were pinned down, absorbing losses. Rommel received the reports and immediately grasped what had changed. The Americans had provided the British a tank with a gun that outranged everything in his army. 18 months of equipment superiority had evaporated overnight. The Afrika Korps wasn't confronting the same enemy anymore. Rommel later wrote about Gazala. The appearance of the new American tank, he acknowledged, tore significant gaps in our formations. He added a bitter reality. Until May 1942, German tanks had generally been superior in quality to the corresponding British types. This was now no longer accurate, at least not to the same degree. That phrase, "at least not to the same degree," captured the shock. For 18 months, German armor had dominated through superior equipment, superior training, and superior tactics. In a single day, American industrial output had eliminated the equipment advantage. The 75mm gun transformed everything. The ugly, ridiculed, compromised M3 Grant had given British crews the capability to destroy panzers from ranges where they couldn't be destroyed back. Rommel understood this was merely the beginning. Rommel adapted rapidly. He had no alternative. The 88mm anti-aircraft gun became his answer. Originally engineered to shoot down aircraft, the 88 could also eliminate tanks at extreme distance. It could destroy Grants from 2,000 meters, far beyond the 75mm effective range. Rommel deployed 88mm guns forward with his armored spearheads. Whenever his panzers encountered Grants, the 88s would engage first from long distance. He also urgently requested more Panzer IV specials. With the high-velocity 75mm gun, the upgraded weapon could match the Grant's range, but the new tanks wouldn't arrive in quantity for months. The Grant's height remained a fatal weakness. On the flat desert, German observers could detect them from miles away. Every engagement began with the Germans knowing exactly where the British armor was positioned. Rommel won the Battle of Gazala through tactical brilliance, not equipment superiority. He outmaneuvered the British. He exploited their errors. Tobruk fell in June. The British retreated deep into Egypt, but the cost exceeded expectations. Rommel captured Tobruk. He was promoted to field marshal, but his tank losses were unsustainable. German factories manufactured roughly 300 tanks monthly. American factories were already producing over 2,000. Every panzer destroyed was irreplaceable. Every Grant destroyed would be replaced within weeks. Rommel had won the battle. He was losing the production war. At El Alamein in July, the British finally halted him. The Grants weren't sufficient to win offensive battles, but they were sufficient to hold defensive positions where German armor had to approach them. The Afrika Korps bled against the Grant line. Each assault cost tanks Rommel couldn't replace. The ugly American compromise was accomplishing exactly what it was engineered to do. In October 1942, the first M4 Shermans arrived in Egypt. Proper turret, rotating 75mm gun, lower profile, everything the M3 should have been. Montgomery assembled overwhelming force for the Second Battle of El Alamein. Over 1,000 tanks, Grants, Shermans, Crusaders, over 1,000 artillery pieces. The attack commenced on October 23rd. 12 days later, Rommel was in full retreat. The Afrika Korps would never recover. The Grant's 6-month war was finished. It had maintained the line from Gazala to El Alamein. It had bled the Afrika Korps of irreplaceable tanks and crews. The coffin for 7 men, the rolling tomb, the target practice, it had accomplished its mission. Today, surviving M3s occupy museums. Visitors walk past them toward the Shermans and Tigers. They glance at the awkward 10-foot silhouette and wonder why anyone constructed something so ugly. The answer is straightforward, because ugly was available when perfect wasn't. American engineers recognized every defect before the first M3 departed the factory: the height, the sponson gun, the riveted armor. They constructed it regardless, because the alternative was nothing. The M3 wasn't designed to be the world's best tank. It was designed to exist when the best tank wasn't possible yet. Rommel understood what that meant. The Americans, he observed, had designed, built, and deployed an effective medium tank in under a year. Germany possessed nothing comparable to that industrial capability. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button for the story archive. History's greatest lessons often hide in the machines everyone mocked.